Hi, welcome back to day 3 of podcast guesting for authors. Today we're talking all about the pitch. So once you've done your research, you need to craft your pitch. Each podcast has a different method for fielding these. Some will have a website with a contact form, others will direct you to an email address, some may have no information or just no website at all, and you have to DM them on Instagram or Twitter. So pay attention to what is available for you to pitch them. So the elements of your pitch need to be a catchy but not misleading subject line, who you are in 1 to 2 sentences. Are you an expert? What is your experience? You do not want to write a novel about your background. That's not the point of this. You want the person to be interested. So 1 to 2 sentences only. Next, you want to provide a list of 3 to 5 topics you can talk about on the show with the host. If these have been covered before, what new perspectives can you bring to the conversation? So again, you're giving them a very specific list of what you can talk about that you know is going to be of interest to the host and to their audience and that you can intelligently speak on. And you're referencing back that, hey, I know that you've already talked about this. Here's what I can add that's new. Here's what I can add that's different. Here's a perspective that wasn't mentioned in that last interview because you've listened to that interview so you know what they have and haven't talked about. Don't just assume based on a title that they didn't cover something that you can cover. It'll be a very bad look for you if you say, well, you didn't cover this, but they did. All right, so you want to make sure that you're listening and you're referencing that in your pitch. Okay, so in those first 2 items, your very short biography and the 3 to 5 topics, you're bringing the benefit to the listener, right? You're explaining how you can benefit the listener. But you also need to provide a benefit to the host. Do you have a strong following that will tune in? Have you been able to bring this to other niches, but so far not to their specific niche? So, all right, that's a benefit to them that they're getting that topic. Have you spoken at events and therefore the host can trust you to put together a sentence coherently? Believe me, sometimes people get on podcasts and they have no clue what to say. They haven't prepped. So being able to say that you have experience, that you are polished, that you've spoken before is a really great way to say, hey, I'm not going to sound like an idiot on your show. That's a benefit to you. If you haven't done any podcasts before, don't worry. You can still talk about some other benefits that you can bring to the conversation for the host. All right, so in general, my tips, now I have an entire PDF that you'll be able to download below on do's and don'ts. There's a lot of don'ts, and one of those things is just really being thoughtful about your pitch. That's the best do. Don'ts, there's a lot of them. Don't sign a wall of text. That's the biggest one. Those are all going to be in the PDF link below for you to check out. In general, though, you want to break through the noise. So a lot of podcasts, especially the big, really successful ones, they get pitches all the time. And how can you break through that noise? How can you get through to that gatekeeper or get past the gatekeeper? So maybe send something at an off hour when they're not getting inundated with other things. Maybe try to connect with them on another channel. But again, you don't want to be pushy and you don't want to come off as phony either. Those connections should be genuine. Referrals also matter. So when I get a pitch for the podcast that I help manage, and it's 1 sentence long, hey, do you want to interview me? No signature, no context, delete. I have no clue who you are. Why would I want to interview you? Like, put some thought and effort into it. So when I get a pitch that is a short novel, my eyes just glaze over. I can't even process it. When I get a PR agency pitching me, sometimes I ignore it because we just get inundated from agencies, and half the time that person has just kept us on their list for years and years, and it's like, this doesn't even relate to the topic of our show, and you didn't put any effort into trying to show how it would be related. So be wary of some of these PR agencies that say they're going to go and get you on a lot of podcasts. If they're not actually doing their homework, it's just going to annoy the podcast, and they're just going to unsubscribe. Sorry, that's just the way it works. But when I do get an email from a listener who reaches out and says, hey, I love your podcast. I just read this great book. I just heard this person on a different podcast. I think they'd be great to have on the show. That's a third party recommending somebody to be on our show. That's somebody who's actually a listener telling us, hey, I would love to hear this person again. I think other people would like to hear it too. If they're not also listening to this podcast, you should have them on. I'm actually going to take the step to do the research to learn who that person is and potentially invite them. So this could be where if you have a friend who is really excited about your content and you know they listen to a podcast, could you ask them to refer you genuinely to a podcast that you would want to be on as well? So that's kind of one way to think about that. I don't always follow through with an interview request in these situations, but it's a much better way to get me, the gatekeeper, to be interested and wanting to learn more. In general, we like genuine emails, not something that was clearly copied and pasted and then blasted everywhere. That's not going to sit well with your gatekeeper who is just inundated with requests for podcast interviews, plus everything else they have to do to help manage the podcast. So keep that in mind. Your gatekeeper is your friend. And another thing to keep in mind with your pitch is that sometimes it just comes down to luck. I wish I could tell you that there was some magic potion that you could apply and everything would just work out. But as a gatekeeper for a weekly podcast, I only have 52 interview slots a year to fill. So if we get amazing pitches and line up interviews for the next 6 months, we're going to hold off on taking new interview requests because we want everything to be timely. We don't want to record it now and then it doesn't air for 5 months and it's not even relevant anymore. So that can be a tough break. So in this case, I usually let people know when they're pitching like, hey, we're just not taking interviews now, right back in a few months. You would be surprised that only 1 or 2 people actually write back in a few months. So that's something to be mindful of, is if the gatekeeper is telling you, hey, not now, here's when you can write back at that time, not sooner. Read their policies, be respectful, and then follow up, because that could just be bad timing that you can't control. But what you can control is then coming back and following up with them. All right, now you've done your research, you've crafted your pitch, and fingers crossed, you've booked some interviews. Tomorrow, I'll go over my tips that can help you prepare to have an amazing interview.